Good evening, and welcome to another Cambridge Hot Club. Today is October 18th, and I'll be with you till 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock tonight. Our guest tonight will be Ken Shophorst. He will be here. He's on his way home to join us, and he'll be with us momentarily. We're going to be listening to the great music of George Russell tonight. And we just heard Miles Davis's composition, Sippin' at the Bells. Let's go right to the music before we start talking about the great Mr. Russell as people trickle in. This is called Jack's Blues. And that piece is entitled Jack's Blues. That's from George Russell's very first recording as a leader from 1956. On piano, Bill Evans. Milt Hinton on bass, Joe Harris on drums, Art Farmer trumpet, Hal McCusick alto saxophone, and Barry Galbraith on the guitar. Ken is on his way here, and Joe, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. We will get to some of your music. If any of you have things you want to hear, please let us know. Okay, we'll get to some more music. This piece is called Suspensions. And that's a piece entitled Suspensions. It's from an album, actually, it's a compilation album called Chromatic Universe, the great George Russell. And I want to welcome my guest and co host, Ken Shaphorst. Welcome.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone.
Also, thank you.
Nice to join you.
Yep. And Joe, thank you for coming. We'll listen to some of your music as we move on tonight.
Yeah, Joe's the real expert.
Any place you want to start, Ken?
No.
No.
I'll just say we are doing a concert tomorrow night at NEC, and so the music is definitely going on in my head as we speak, thinking about all the things we need to do. It's not easy music, I'll just say. Anyone who knows George's music knows that. But it's a real pleasure, to work with it and share it with the students, and we're having fun.
Ken Shaphorst, let me introduce you. He is the chairman of the Jazz Studies at New England Conservatory. You've been there for over 20 years now, I believe.
Yeah, seems hard to believe.
Yep.
This is my 23rd year.
23rd year. Congratulations. That's great.
So, I mean, do you want me to talk about George, or
Sure.
Or have you done that?
We've not talked about him. Nope, not yet.
Okay.
So before you went to NEC, how familiar were you with George's music?
That's a good question. I went to NEC as a student, first of all. So that was my first direct contact with him. And I think I've told the story before, but George kind of scared me as a student. I would occasionally play trumpet. I'm a very poor trumpet player, I should first of all say. But I would, maybe get asked to sub in a big band or something. And George, he was tough. He was a taskmaster. And so I would just try to lay low. And I think I would occasionally try to engage him in conversations about his music. I took one of his classes, but I didn't really get to know him until I came back. The other introduction I want to say is I heard his recordings. So this was before I went to NEC. I think the first piece I ever heard was on this compilation. I forget the label, but they had a sort of a third stream themed LP that I had when I was in high school. and it had a lot of these greatest hits of the third stream movement. And uh, the piece that was on there that just blew me away was the Concerto for Billy the Kid, which is from George's first recording. And that made me very curious about him. And when I got to NEC, of course, I asked him for the score. And I forget his response. Again, he was sweet in a certain way. I saw more of that when I came back as a faculty member, but he could also be a little dismissive. He would say, "Oh, I'm just transcribe it." I think was his response. You can hear it.
Yeah, I've been reading the Duncan Henning book,
Mhm.
and they talk as when he came to NEC in the 1970s. I think more than half of his students did not get him.
Hmm.
You know, they appreciated his genius, but
Yeah, and yet the ones who got him, I'll say, because I've seen this myself through my friends who worked with George, played with him. The ones who got him were changed forever. I mean, it was one person we had at NEC pretty recently was Don Byron, amazing
right.
jazz clarinetist. I mean, George changed his life, and he talks about this a lot. Um, so yeah, I think there were people who just didn't buy it. What is this Lydian chromatic concept thing? And other people not only got it, but were transformed through playing his music, through the theory. That was. I'll just say for Don, as soon as I got into the position I was in, so I knew him a little bit from when I was a student. He said, "Oh, someday we're going to have to do Bird in Igor's Yard." He loved that piece, and I think was always trying to get an opportunity to do it. And either he couldn't get the music, I forget, but we've done it now 2 or 3 times. but that's just one example, one of many.
You mentioned Concerto for Billy the Kid, and that was the first piece that I became acquainted with him, and it made me a lifelong fan of both him and the piano player, whoever his name was, Bill something. And both of them have been an important part of my listening and that was back. I mean, that recording was made in '57,
Hmm.
and I probably heard it a couple of years later,
Hmm.
and it blew my mind. The whole album blew my mind. I like uh, uh, who was the alto saxophonist? Al McCusack,
Al McCusick. Yeah.
and I think um, Art Farmer was on that as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Milt Hinton.
Milt Hinton, yeah, figure that. Milt Hinton. How do you figure Milt Hinton on that kind of a date? But he did a beautiful job.
No, I think that, I mean, I love a lot of George's music, but that's an amazing
A nice introduction,
debut
right?
recording. Yeah.
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 Well, we could go to that right now, and I'm going to play the second take because, well, Bill Evans is brilliant on both of them, but I like his solo on the second one. So let me find that. I had queued up Lunacy, which has Joe Hunt in the. So we'll come back to that. Just bear with me 1 second. It is missing right now. Let's go to. Hmm, hmm, hmm. I'm sorry about that. You know what? You mentioned Hal McCusick. That's right here. And let's listen to Lydian Lullaby. that was Hal McCusick. And, a piece George Russell wrote called Lydian Lullaby. Hal McCusick on sax, Barry Galbraith guitar, Milt Hinton again on bass, and on the drums, O.C. Johnson. Yes, Hal and George were very, very tight, very simpatico. Any comments? Cliff just posted the concert tomorrow night, 7:30 at Jordan Hall. Do not miss it. If you are in Boston, it will be great.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Jeff.
So I'm curious, Joe, did you work with Hal McCusick?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yes, I did. When I first moved here to Boston in the early 70s, I did a lot of summers in Long Island. I'd go back to Long Island and play with him. Teddy Kotick was the bassist, Charlie LaChapelle, and Tony Zano, often the pianist, and quartet gigs.
Mm-hmm.
And he was quite a character. And quite a wonderful, as we heard, one of the great alto saxophonists, tremendous talent. And he's also a woodworker. And a photographer. He was sort of a what do they call it? He had a name, a guy that does everything. Hal McCusick was sort of that. He had a beautiful summer home where actually he lived all year on in Long Island, out on Long Island. But yeah, I was very fortunate. I worked quite a bit with Hal.
Mm-hmm.
And he encouraged us to do what he said sometimes, let's do an abstract, which meant we'd just play free for 10 minutes, And it was a lot of fun working with him. He actually gave us a lot of freedom in the quartet. He said some funny things. He said his influence were Bird, Charlie Parker, and Prez, Lester Young. And so then sometimes he didn't know whether to be Bird or Prez or Bird.
Mm-hmm.
It was so funny that way. But I was very lucky to have played with him quite a bit.
Did he also play clarinet?
He did. Great clarinet player, yeah. He
And-
played all the woodwind instruments, actually. It's why he was such a popular studio player in New York. And he could read anything, sight read it. Great musician. And he's on so many big band recordings, of course, in his career.
He played flute very well, too. He played flute with George.
Was that right? I didn't know that. Not surprised, but
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great one. I wasn't familiar with that piece, but thanks for finding that one, Bill.
Okay,
So that's a recording where he's the leader, Hal McCusick, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And George is not even on that record. Just a compilation of pieces he recorded. And we got a few more things from Hal's band. But we were talking about Concerto for Billy the Kid. And I'm going to play Take Two, extraordinary Bill Evans here. And that was a piece entitled Fellow Delegates, featuring on percussion, the great George Russell. That is from the album Jazz in the Space Age. We heard that was recorded in 1959. Actually, it was recorded earlier. I'm sorry, 56. Bill Evans, Milt Tintin, Paul Motion on the drums, Art Farmer and Hal McCusick on trumpet and alto saxophone. Any comments on those two selections? Bill Evans was something else on. I see your mouth moving. You're on. Let's unmute you.
You talking to me?
But Bill Evans played great.
Oh yeah.
Terrific Bill solo. I don't think the title of that was Jazz in the Space Age. That's a title that came later, I believe.
Right.
I think
that was from the Jazz Workshop. You're correct.
Jazz
Yeah.
Workshop. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the one on RCA with the guys that you talked about earlier. The other one was
Yeah.
a big band album, I think.
Sounded like it. Yeah. Sounded a little different.
But that solo, that Bill Evans solo, you know, I listened to the original one when I got the LP 100 years ago, and I must have listened to it every day for a long time because that solo was embedded in my brain. And I've heard this before, but I haven't heard it as often. And it's equally as good. It shows how creative Bill Evans was. And, you know, people think of him as like this ballad player, but boy, he could swing when he wanted to.
Oh yeah.
One of the challenges, I'll just say, in playing some of these legendary pieces, I'll put All About Rosie in the same category. I mean, the Bill Evans solo on that is also pretty stunning. I think George had to deal with this himself. You know, what do? Do you just play Bill's solo? I mean, it could be worth hearing and having, for instance, a student just learn that solo. I remember Fred Hirsch, who was a student at NEC, told me that George wanted him to play Bill's solo on All About Rosie. And he had it written out so that it wouldn't be too much work. You know, Fred read well, so he could just play it. But Fred refused. I remember him saying, at that point, Bill Evans was still alive. He said, if you want Bill Evans, you should go get Bill Evans. Fred was, you know, tough even as a student, I guess. And but you know, I think about that. You know, we're doing All About Rosie. We're not doing that particular one, but I always tell the students to learn the solo, like learn Bill Evans's solo. But I guess I prefer them to make up their own solo and try to incorporate some of what Bill is doing. But the thing I'll just say that most students struggle with is how to project the time as well as be inventive, I guess, as you put it, Arthur. You know, I mean, he's improvising, Bill Evans. He's not playing the same solo every time, I know. And to do that while at the same time being so clear, like there's no question about where the beat is. I would say that's one of the hardest things.
When Jerry Mulligan recorded that tune, that song, that piece, I was a little disappointed because I was waiting for a real piano solo and it didn't happen.
That's right. Yeah.
But it was a good recording, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah, I like that recording for other reasons. Mel Lewis is on drums. He sounds great, of course. And
He always sounds great.
Some good soloists, Jerry Mulligan. I think Brookmeyer solos on that. But you're right, there's nothing to match that Bill Evans solo. And it's the same thing. Everyone stops and he just plays so great.
So Bill?
Yes.
I don't want to change your itinerary or anything, but around 8:15 I have to take off. So I have about a little more than a half hour if you'd like me to talk about the sextet or something.
Sure. Actually, I have the record AC queued up.
I can wait a little bit, but I do have to leave at 8:15. So
Well, right
whatever
now
you
I'm at
have.
the studio recording, which is called NKC. But so I assume you met George in Indiana. You were living there then, or?
Yes, I did meet him in Indiana. Yeah. I can tell you, I'll try to make it as quick as I can. You want me to tell you a little how the sextet started, maybe the Indiana guys?
Absolutely.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try not to talk all night. I do that sometimes, but well, I'll talk about myself a little bit. I was attended self-taught drummer, and I attended Indiana University from 1956 to I guess 3 years, 59 it would be. And then my fourth year, I dropped out to go on the road, and I moved to Detroit, uh, where I played in some really good bands for a year or so, bebop guys. And while in Indiana, I studied classical music because music school. I played timpani in the orchestra. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn music. So I'm very grateful for that. Anyway, I was up in Detroit playing jazz sessions at night and playing in a strip club to make money on the weekends and I was a kid, I was 20 years old or something, having a great time. And I got a call from my friend David Baker, with whom I had played in Indiana. I'd played in his band as a student. We had a really good band there. And Baker said, if you want to go to New York and play at the Five Spot this summer, come back to Indiana and rehearse with George Russell. I didn't know who George Russell was, but I liked the idea of going to New York with a gig, because that was my plan anyway. At some point, I figured once I got myself together enough, I'd probably try to go to New York. So it was a little earlier than I'd planned, but I quit the job at the strip club and got in my car and I drove to Indiana. And what had happened was, to give a little preview, before that time in this is 1960, 1959, George got his horn section together because he had attended the Lenox Jazz School near Lenox, Massachusetts. That's another whole story, very interesting story. And George Schuler, Gunther Schuler's son, is a film about Lenox, which, in case you want to sometime, it's really interesting. He's done some really serious research. But the Lenox Jazz School was a school sponsored by private citizens, Philip and Stephanie Barber, who had a wonderful large summer home, and they loved jazz, and they opened it for students in the summertime. And for 2 weeks, students would come from all over. You had to be audition and send recording of yourself, and they were chosen. A few students, maybe a total class of maybe 20 to 25 students, and the teachers were fabulous. The year in 1959, when George was there, Max Roach, Kenny Dorham, Bill Evans, I think, was in and out. It was a stunning faculty and a chance for young students to play with these great teachers for a couple of weeks and study. Anyway, in 1959, 3 attendees from Indiana University went to Lenox School. David Young, saxophonist, David Baker, trombonist, and Alan Kiger. They're all great players and guys I'd worked with as a student. We played weekends in frat houses and stuff, so they're good buddies of mine. Anyway, they attended this school. They're a little bit older than me, but they were there in '59, and George heard them and was impressed. And at around that time, I think, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think that George had written quite a bit of music, and he wanted to have a group, but he couldn't. The New York guys, like the wonderful Billy the Kid that we heard, that kind of stuff with people like Barry Galbraith and Art, and these guys were busy. They're studio guys, or Art Farmer had a gig with Horace Silver or whatever. They were busy, and George couldn't really use them in a regular group. They could do record dates, but not to travel and so on. So I think at this point, it kind of worked really well. George found these 3 guys that I mentioned, who were all wonderful players, good readers, and ready for something, and they became his horn line. And Baker was also a composer. the other two were not at that time. Later, Kiger began composing as well, but I think Baker was the only composer of the three at the time. And they became George's horn section. So they made a couple of records, Jazz in the Space Age. I think they were on that one with the double pianos, Paul Bley and Bill Evans, and also New York, New York. I think some or all of them are on those recordings that George made on Decca label. And then I'm not sure what happened between then, because I wasn't there. I wasn't in school in '59, but that was a big year. Ornette showed up. He had at the 5-Spot, and he made his debut at this 5-Spot Cafe in New York. And then he went to the Lenox School, and that was Ornette Coleman's debut in the East Coast. Well, the following summer, the school was open again. So back to Indianapolis in the rehearsals. I'd come from Detroit with my three buddies, and there was a bassist. What the heck was his name? I can't remember his name
Chuck
now.
Israel?
No. Chuck came that later. Ted Snyder. Ted Snyder was a bass player, a really good bass player. He was a classic guy. He was a good symphony player, and he played a little jazz. But George's music was really hard, and I got the gig by accident because Indianapolis, where they were tons of great drummers. I mean, these guys were way better than me. They could swing you, like George said, they'd swing you into bad health. These guys were so good, but they couldn't read well, and they couldn't handle his music. His music was quite challenging, and they just couldn't do it. So I lucked out. I was, up and coming bopper, and I got my chops together in Detroit. And I could play bop pretty good, and I could read well because of my training at school. So it was kind of right. I was kind of the right drummer for his music, but none of us kind of really understood it that well. We weren't really sure about it, and he was patient with me, and like he said, there's a the new Donna. He wrote a chart, a nice chart on Donna Lee, but it's his version of it. He calls it New Donna. And he wanted me at the rehearsal, play 8 bars. I want an 8-bar solo. This is out of nowhere. So I start playing jing-a-ding, just something basic, and he stops and says, I want something really good. I want you to play something that's different. So, oh man, what am I going to do? I don't know. He demanded, well, Ken knows this. He's demanding, So I got to come up by the seat of my pants. And so luckily I'd heard this lick that Shelly Manne played one time that was kind of hard. So I took that lick and kind of made something out of it for 8 bars, and it became kind of famous. It was like the introduction to Donna Lee that I always played on the gigs and on the recording. I just stole it from Shelly, but I just had to come up with something, and he didn't. There was no time to waste. He was very demanding, and his music was weird, I thought. And I was just thinking about getting to New York, with a gig, and I was playing with my buddies, and anyway, like I warned you, I'd go on, and I'll try to be a little more brief. So Snyder, the bass player, was classically trained, a really nice guy. He wasn't a jazz player though. His beat wasn't strong. So we went to the 5-Spot and opened, and we actually played a week there, I believe, or maybe 2, maybe just 1. And we were received by everybody in New York came to hear us. I was scared to death. I looked out in the audience, and there's Max Roach and Charles Mingus and Horace Silver and all these guys I got records of, and they're listening to us, But they, we were received pretty well. Whitney Ballier, the reviewer for New Yorker, he liked us. He gave us a good review, and Downbeat sort of liked it okay. So we had a week or 2 at the 5-Spot, but this bass player, Ted, he just didn't have the groove. I had been playing in Detroit with some really heavy guys. I was really fortunate, and I missed that beat, that walking 4/4 beat that Ted simply didn't have. He's a really good player, great guy. We got to the jazz school. We were all artists in residence at Lenox after that first week or 2 at the 5-Spot. We took a break, and we went to Lenox for, I think, 10 days or something, and then came back and finished the whole summer at the 5-Spot. We played for another 6 weeks or something after that. But while in Lenox, I met Chuck Israels, and Chuck and I played a little bit together, and it was sort of love at first beat. We really liked playing together. So I guess I'm the guilty guy. I kind of got Chuck on the band, and suggested to George to maybe get rid of Ted. So Ted went back to Indiana, and I kind of felt bad about that, but that's the way it works in music, I guess. Um, so along around that time, well, by the way, Chuck and I are long-term friends. Just the day before yesterday, I played with Chuck at Brandeis. He showed up for an honor, and he wanted to do a little concert in the afternoon. So Bob Nesky set it up for his history class, and it was really fun to play with Chuck after all these years. And we hit it off. We just hit that pocket right away, and we fought like cats and dogs over the years, but we played great together. And we've been in all kinds of different bands, so it was really fun to hang with Chuck and play with him. I'm getting off the track, but I got Chuck on the band basically, and Chuck had quite a career already. He'd been in New York, Paris, playing with Bud Powell, and as a very young person, he had a pretty good career going for him. Great beat, great feel. He always had a wonderful feel, and I loved his solo concept. He's not like, oh yeah, George wanted Scott LaFaro. He mentioned Scott's name around that time because he knew that this guy Ted wasn't going to last. So he had mentioned to me, do you know this Scott LaFaro? I said, I don't know this. I don't know that name. I don't know who it is. Well, of course, he's a fantastic virtuoso. But at that time, I didn't know who the heck Scott LaFaro was. But I knew Chuck, and Chuck playing was just right for the band. Now, Chuck and George didn't get along so well. They had different concepts. It wasn't real, what can I say, easy going. But sometimes that's good in a band, as long as people don't fight, then a little bit of friction can actually be okay. But they didn't agree. I think the dissonance of George's Lydian concept didn't agree with Chuck so much. But he played the music really well, and stayed on the band off and on for a couple of years. He was the bassist, and so at that time, then that was the rhythm section. So 2/3 of the band had been already established, the sextet, in 1959 at Lenox School, and then in 1960 at the Indiana rehearsals, I came on, and then later Chuck, and that finished the other 2/3 of the rhythm section with, of course, George playing piano. Who, by the way, was really fun to play with. He was a really fun piano player because he was a drummer himself. That was a little spooky too, because he was a good drummer. I think he was Benny Carter's drummer when he was younger.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of on my toes. I had to be on my toes to play with him. So one real quick story. One time on the gig, I played a little lick that you've probably heard, Milestones by Miles Davis. And the Philly Joe Jones, the drummer, he plays a little rim tap on the fourth beat. He plays the tap there, right? So I did that one night on the gig at the 5 Spot. And when we took a break, George came over and physically grabbed me by my lapel. He shook me, and I was scared. He grabbed me and said, "Don't ever do that again." And I said, "What did I do? What did I do?" And he said, you took somebody's signature. You don't do that. He said, "You can do that sound, but do it on the and of 3 or something, but don't do it like Billy Joe did it." And he meant it. He was angry. I was freaked out. I'd never seen him I think maybe he'd been drinking. I don't know, but he was really pissed off. So that's kind of an interesting thing to share with you, though, because I could play anything I wanted just about. I mean, I had total a la carte. I could do anything I wanted, but if I stole somebody's signature, or if he heard a lick that was copied from somewhere, that really pissed him off. Just to kind of share that with you, he demanded total originality, and he got it. He got us to play stuff we never thought we'd play. At least for myself, I never imagined doing free music. I'd never done it in my life. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was crazy stuff at first at the rehearsal. Like, what kind of crazy stuff is this? But we were all playing rubato, sometimes, and playing free. And he taught me so much. And we became pretty good friends, actually, over the years. I stayed in New York when that gig was over, and stayed there for 10 years, became a New Yorker. The other guys went back to Indiana, the horn players. But they came back for record sessions, and we played Birdland one time. They didn't like us at Birdland. We were not a hit. But we went to Kansas City, and they loved us in Kansas City. I mean, we were playing all this Lydian stuff, doing free interludes and and mostly black people, you know, they loved it. They're clapping, they dug it because, well, we could play some blues too, you know. So then that was that group. And then the group changed slightly over the next year. I got drafted into the Army in 1962. So right before I got drafted, I did the session with Eric Dolphy. He came on for we didn't rehearse. He came to the record session and we rehearsed right there. We did the aesthetic session to my memory. I don't remember any rehearsals. And that's kind of a famous recording.
Brilliant.
Don Ellis.
Yeah.
And,
Wonderful
Cool.
stories. Francie has a hand up.
sure.
Francie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Hunt. If you'd like to talk, I'll listen forever.
Well, I gotta take off at 10 past, so I got a little bit of time left.
Okay, great. And thank you so much for sharing
Sure.
such depth and wisdom and history and insight. You know, you just can't get this out of a book.
No, you can't. I'm a really lucky guy. I tell you, I've just been at the right places, I guess, like that, you know, in Indianapolis, just able to read music, and you know, I'm very fortunate that
Yeah, well, you know, life gave you an opportunity to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
prepared and you embraced it.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. I'm
Very,
wondering,
very
Mr.
fortunate.
Hunt, did you cross paths with Art Farmer?
I have crossed paths with him. I played with his brother quite a bit, Addison Farmer, twin brother of Art. We played
Wow.
quite a bit together, but I never played with Art, but I knew him.
Uh,
I ran into Art Farmer on a subway when he was playing in Boston, probably in the early 80s. There's a club in Kenmore Square where he was playing. And I recognized him. I thought, damn, that looks like Art Farmer. So I went up to him. I said, excuse me, are you Art Farmer? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I know your brother. I said, I used to work with Addison. We had a little talk. We chatted on the subway. He was going back to the hotel, I guess, and I was going to Berkeley or something. So we didn't talk for very long. But he said to me, yeah, I said, you probably don't remember me, but, you know, I used to work at Birdland with Addison. He said, I remember you. He says, what are you doing here? I said, I'm teaching. I'm making a living. It was funny. So I went to hear him. Oh, my God, he sounded great. He had the great Alan Dawson was playing with him, and they were buddies from Hampton's band. It was a reunion. These guys sounded great. It was a terrific night at where he was working. But I never played with him. I love his playing. I've got all his records.
you know, it's interesting. He transitioned in October of
Yes.
1999.
Yes.
And I never met him, but I was buddies with his wife,
Oh,
his former wife.
I see.
And they remained great friends. Shirley Stewart Farmer. She always kept her married name.
Ah,
And he was a very generous cat. When he transitioned in his will, Shirley was the executrix of his will. And even though Shirley was an attorney, Mr. Hunt, he knew she loved to sing. She loved jazz and classical. So he left her a bequest of $100,000 because he knew that would be just the right number to allow her to rent out Weil Hall next to Carnegie and do a one-woman evening performance. So even when he crossed over, he kept the friendship alive.
well, that's nice. That's wonderful. That's a great story.
So Joe, do you remember the in Kansas City studio? This is Don Ellis on trumpet.
Right.
A piece called Lunacy.
Yeah, I remember David Baker's piece, I think.
Shall we listen to that?
Sure.
I wonder, could I jump in just for a second, Bill?
Of course.
You know, Joe and I could probably talk about this another time, but we are playing Aesthetic in the concert tomorrow night.
Mm.
And I'm just curious because if you know that piece, the original recording and the Gil Evans arrangement that we're doing, there's this double time thing. So it's a blues, but Stratus Funk is what I'm thinking of.
That is fun.
I'm confused about the pieces. And I think you were the first person to do that. I go into double time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, no. I was not.
No?
Nah. No.
So my question was, did George tell you to do something like that? I want you to play double time here, like sort of out of the blue, just suddenly do that.
Chances are he suggested it.
Yeah,
I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure he probably did.
because it's sort of become part of the tune, like the arrangement. When people play that piece now, they always do that. Like one chorus of just swing and then sort of suddenly like a double time feel more than a double time
Yeah, double feel.
itself.
It's cool. It's cool because when you go into straight time, it's like, it feels good, right?
Yeah, no, I like it. I make the drummer do it, but
Yeah.
I was always curious, like because of George, of course, being a drummer, is that would he tell you to do things like that, or was it some?
Yeah, he would make suggestions. He would make occasionally, or maybe there'd be an arrangement for that matter, like you're saying. But he welcomed our ideas. In
Mhm.
fact, he dug it, and he got excited about rhythms, of course, and a couple of times he called me on the phone to be 2 a.m. or something, wake me up. Joe, man, I got this great idea. Listen to this, and he'd be kind of just solfeging something, And I say, yeah, George, that's cool, I don't know. But he
Can
was,
I go back to sleep?
yeah, right. But I mean, he was so enthusiastic about his music. It was wonderful, his enthusiasm was just bubbling, he loved input. Any kind of ideas, as long as they were original. Like I said, if it was somebody else's, he'd be equally angry, but if it was something that we came up with, he welcomed it. Our ideas. It's a wonderful job. It was a great gig to have that kind of freedom. I kind of didn't realize it at the time. What a great opera. And he insisted that we develop our originality, our sound, and I mean, he was training us, man. It was fabulous, a fabulous experience. And
I'm wondering if Dolphy played with you on gigs, or was it just for the recording?
no, he just made that one record.
I know, but he never played with you on a job.
Well, not with me. I got soon after that. I was drafted into the service, so I don't think he stayed on the band. I think John Gilmore came on the band as the regular woodwind guy, tenor player. Paul Plummer, and then John Gilmore maybe. But I don't think Derek traveled or played gigs that I know of. Just that one record. And a little bit of a funny story, I guess it's funny about the record. George was trying to get me on this band, great trumpet player, Booker Little. Booker Little had a group with Eric Dolphy, and they made a recording at the Five Spot, live at the Five Spot. They had Eddie Blackwell was drummer, great drummer, Mal Waldron. I don't remember who the bass player was. But anyway, George tried to get me on that band. He spoke to Booker Little, I think, or maybe Eric too, and told him about me. And I never got an audition. I never got a crack at it. But that's kind of a backstory. But at the record session, Dolphy didn't like my playing, and he let me know. He was unhappy with my groove or whatever it was. And I was in kind of a bad mood at the time, I guess. I wasn't ready for any bullshit from anybody. I suppose even him, So I sort of met it with, sort of screw you. And I just, went for it. And we sort of had a kind of a, like that, for the personalities weren't matching. But as I listen to the record today, it's pretty exciting, because we got some pretty good stuff between the two of us, kind of a dialogue, that happens in music sometimes. When everything's all smooth and great, it's a little bit boring. But sometimes, I think that might have happened with me and Eric at that particular session, because he really screams, man. And I don't know I don't think it's all about me. I don't think he's angry. I'm gonna get you. I don't think it's like that or nothing. But I mean, he was screaming for something, man. He was really, really on it. And because he was bummed out at me or something, he said something like, you don't play like Danny or something, like with Mingus or something. And I don't know, he didn't dig my stuff. So I said, well, I'll show you, and we kind of got into that little backstory on that one. And then another one with the Ground Midnight, that kind of came out of nowhere. Don Ellis picked up a trash can and started beating it with a stick, making these improvised sounds like a graveyard sounds, and David Baker said, Monk's going to come after you, man. Monk is going to sue you, for doing this to his song, And that was all spontaneous too. The whole record session was rehearsed and done all at once, one shot. And to Eric's credit, he was a fabulous sight reader, great musician. He just read the parts, and the rest of us actually had played some of the music, I think, before some of it. I don't know about aesthetic though. I don't know if we'd actually played that on a gig. I think all of us were kind of sight reading that one, maybe.
Don Ellis was another genius.
Oh, he was great. Yeah, he was wonderful.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Joe. I didn't want to take too much time, Bill, if you want to play a track, but I wanted to ask that question about
Oh, no.
Stratus Funk. Thanks.
I'll shut up now. That's pretty much my story.
We could go to aesthetic, but I got queued up Lunacy, which is with Don Ellis, and you, Joe, Dave
Yeah,
Baker.
that's a David Baker chart, and it sort of slows down and speeds up. And we would do that kind of thing in George's band. We would fool around with tempos, and as I recall, I think that's Lunacy.
At Lunacy, yep. Hmm.
So, Ken, it's a Lydian, just you, just me, with a crazy bridge.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe, you sound great.
That was a lot of fun. That George's solo is great on his piano solo was completely open and free. That was what we were all kind of shooting for, what he did. But I have to kind of say goodbye, Bill. Thank you very much for inviting me and letting me spiel. And it's great to see everybody and have a good remainder. Enjoy the remainder of the show. I got an appointment. I got to take off. So nice to see everybody. Thank you.
Good to see you, Joe. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Ken, anything you'd like to play right now? You sent me your list. I've got it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Also,
I have a Zoom. Ooh.
You got George Russell at the 5 spot.
I have that. Yep. So it wasn't live at the 5 spot.
That's right. I keep forgetting that. That's right.
It's just
I wonder
called.
what the story was that. Yeah, I'm remembering that now. Do you know why?
These were just studio recordings, and I think it was probably maybe publicity, or
Yeah.
let's see, here is live at 5 spots, even though it's not live.
I wonder if we can go back to one of the early ones, like Cubana B, Cubana Bop.
Yeah.
Would you be up for that, Bill?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's one I talked to George a lot about. Because I was sort of fascinated by that whole story, like Dizzy's big band and Chano Pozo. George told me he was scared of Chano Pozo. I don't know if I can do my imitation of George, but he said he would carry a knife apparently, and he died, and it was, I think he was stabbed or shot or something at a pretty young age. The conga player on this, but it's just an amazing piece given the time or any time. I mean, that's the thing about George's music. It still sounds very fresh to me, a lot of it. But this was, I should know, 47 maybe? Do you have a date on that one?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the idea of combining jazz and Afro-Cuban music was brand new. And Dizzy's band was where it was happening. And George writes this crazy piece. Oh, the other thing he told me is I think they premiered it in Carnegie Hall and then Boston Symphony Hall. So the whole band came up here and played it. And it was, I think he said, on the bus ride to Boston where Chano Pozo had this idea that George wrote this, as you'll hear, Cubana B. It's crazy. A lot of, if you know, like musically, it's a lot of the diminished scale, which has become a big part of jazz. It's like half step, whole step, half step, whole step, that pattern. Basically, the whole first movement is all that scale. And then it goes into this thing that Chano Pozo just kind of improvised, and he taught the band some chants. And George said they were like religious chants that no one had recorded at that time. It's sort of a secretive, religion that has roots in Africa. And so apparently he got in trouble, Chano Pozo. That's the other thing George told me, is that when people found out he was like recording this on a commercial label, I think it was RCA, there were a lot of people who were very unhappy with Chano Pozo for doing this. But you'll hear, if we listen to the whole piece, Cubana B, which George wrote, then there's this Afro-Cuban, like traditional Afro-Cuban chant that Chano Pozo sings. It's amazing. I've done this piece, obviously it's impossible to do that part. I mean, Chano Pozo was like, maybe, I think George had one other person, I forget the name of him, and George recorded him. And when he would do this piece at NEC, he would have the band play Cubana B, then he would play this tape of, maybe it'll come to me, someone he worked with. That's it, Sabu Martinez, thank you. So he would play this recording of Sabu Martinez doing, because he knew the chant, he knew the whole routine, and then the band would play the rest. But I think this is just an amazing piece.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah, Dizzy sounds great, of course.
It's funny in retrospect, and thinking this was in 47 and how new, that it's just hard to believe there wasn't more Latin influence. Of course, Ellington did Latin, but
well, it was happening. I mean, there were Latin things happening in New York City, but the idea of combining, like when you hear the piece, you'll hear it's like this mode, and Chano Pozo was definitely involved in that. But then I think Dizzy was involved too. Like there's a bridge to the tune that sounds like Dizzy's music. It's a bunch of 2/5s, and so this idea of combining it, Manteca is maybe my favorite of the Dizzy Chano Pozo collaborations. I mean, you can hear both sides. I think that's what was new. Is it's not just like Tito Puente's group, which is of course great, but this idea of combining that with bebop, really, that was very new and still kind of revolutionary. Yeah.
Cubana B, Cubano Bop, 1947, Dizzy Gillespie Orchestra.
Hell yeah.
Incredible. That's right. That will raise the dead. Mm.
Yeah, that's a great recording. That's not the one where he starts the chant. I think it's the studio recording where he does that, but that's great. That's a great one too.
That's a live at Carnegie Hall.
Mhm.
And then I don't have it, but they do with Bird on that concert, Relaxing at Camarillo, and George Russell also arranged that version as well. I don't know if it's where it is. It must be somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder sometimes what happens to some of the music. I do remember at some point George told me that he lost that chart, and he had to kind of, it was published as a stock arrangement. I don't know, which was commercially available. So that's what we play at NEC when we have to play the music. We don't have George's manuscript the way we do for a lot of the music, but I kind of wish someone had saved that one. I think what we have or what's on the stock arrangement is pretty close to that. But it's there are a lot of stories like that in the history of jazz, like charts getting lost. But that's I think that's a very important recording. Like for George, it was certainly a big step for him, writing for Dizzy's band, but also for the development of Afro-Cuban music and combined with jazz.
Bill, please forgive me. I am just so gloriously, rhapsodiously enchanted by this music. I mean, it is just exceptional. So I'm wondering, Bill, tell me, please, educate me, please. How is it, if it is, that this music never found its way into major films as scores, as accompaniment to driving narratives? I mean, the sweep, the generosity, the reach is so magnificent. How is it that it never, if it's true, never made its way into major motion picture films? I'm just wondering.
I mean, you look at how unknown, underappreciated. I mean, you got Ken, you have 30, 40 young students. How many of them knew George Russell 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think because of NEC's connection, maybe more than you'd find in a typical school. I mean, he was hired when they started the jazz department in 1969. So he's like kind of in the history books here. But even with that, I would say maybe a quarter or less, knew his name, knew his music a little bit. Yeah.
And Bill, do you know, or Ken, do you know who controls his estate?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think his wife, who's still alive, Alice, has control of it.
And do you know, Ken, where she's located?
She's in the Boston area. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to make a movie, and if they want to really have an absolute hit, they have got to have this music in the movie. I mean, somebody like Scorsese, who obviously loves jazz, etc. But I see an opportunity for his music to get a second wave, a second wind, that people will be talk about reissues, the rush to reissue.
Yeah, I remember
I
the first
think
time
she
I
could
heard.
become.
I remember hearing Manhattan for the first time, and that whole suite, how that is not more known. So
Well, I was going to say that New York, the album you're talking about, really put him back on the map. I think
Yep.
when
Mhm.
he came up with that big band album. That was after the Riversides that was so inventive. But then he went from that sextet to the big band, and with all those great players, Coltrane, uh, uh, Bill Evans, George, no, not
Max Roach played drums on that.
Max Roach, but who was the other tenor saxophonist with
Well, Coltrane, he took the solo.
no, the other one, with the art form, Benny Golson. Benny Golson was on that as well.
Bob Brookmeyer. I mean, there's so many great players on that
That
record.
was a terrific band.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I agree with you, Francie, about, I guess, the frustration about George's music not being better known. But the other thing I'll say is, he was a major theorist. I don't know if this is the place to discuss this, but I feel the same way about that. He developed this Lydian chromatic concept. And as you mentioned earlier, Bill, not everybody gets it or, is a believer, but many significant artists, again, as I mentioned earlier, have had their lives transformed by George, his music, but also his theory and his ideas about music. I mean, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, absolutely were transformed. If I can talk about three major figures in the history of jazz, by not only George, his personality, knowing him, but his ideas about the theory of music.
What did Gil Evans think about that?
Oh,
they were all buddies. That's part of what's fascinating about that time is, they all hung out together. Yeah, Gil played his music on, one of the things we're doing tomorrow night is Gil's arrangement of Stratus Funk, which is on a Gil Evans record called Out of the Cool.
Right.
Gil,
I was thinking that.
And
Gil loved George's music so much he wanted to arrange the piece, put it on his own record.
In the 1970s, Gil recorded Blues in Orbit, which is, how many other people at that period were recording? And yeah, Gil kept George Russell in his book forever.
And maybe I'll say one more thing. I don't know if you were going to mention this at some point, Bill, but Carla Bley was another student of his. And I talked to Carla about that relationship. I mean, George not only taught her, I mean, she was a student of the Lydian chromatic concept, but he also recorded her music before anyone else did, in the sextet. I mean, some of those same sessions that you played, Bill, include Carla Bley compositions.
We can listen to some of those. She told a story that, she was a cigarette girl at Birdland. And as we know, still a lot of misogyny, but there was a lot in the 1950s among musicians. And she was seeing a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist wanted her to go into shock treatment and had all these other barbaric treatments recommendations for her. And then he asked her, outside of playing piano, what else can you do? And she said, I can sew. So she started doing applications to work as a seamstress. And I forget how George found out about her or heard her and heard one of her pieces. And George started recording her music. And she did say, George saved my life.
Anybody who can record a song, to write a song and then name it Ida Lupino has to be among my top favorites.
I think she wrote rhymes, correct? Yeah. Which, let's see that. Yeah. Shall we listen to that since we've talked about Carla? Beautiful composition by the recently departed Carla Bley. There are probably half a dozen pieces that George recorded of hers. Ken, how did you narrow down? You've got about 6 or 7 segments tomorrow in your the long list of things that you're not playing.
Hmm.
Share with us how you the thematic in some of choosing the music for tomorrow, and we can go ahead and talk about the different pieces.
Yeah. It was difficult. I did, a variety of things with George when he was still at NEC, and I joined the faculty. And one of the things I guess I'm most grateful for is we did African Game. So I felt like I had to do that. That I think is maybe his most ambitious composition. Also, I think one of the most successful. Has a very important connection to Boston. He wrote it when he was here. It was premiered at the Emmanuel Church on Newbury Street. It's a great recording, live recording. I was at that concert, and it was amazing because, it's a church sanctuary, and I don't know if anyone else in the call was there, but it was it sounded boomy. It was hard for me to hear. Like, I could tell it was amazing music, but it was hard for me to pick out all that was going on. And of course, they were mixing it, and they multi-tracked the recording, and I was kind of amazed when the record came out how great it sounded. But anyway, we're doing not the whole thing, but I would say 2/3 of it, half to 2/3 of that piece. So that was one sort of no-brainer. And then All About Rosie, I think of it almost like the NEC, like alma mater. George, when George did a concert with his students, he did that every time that I remember. It was always All About Rosie. It's just an amazing piece. So then, trying to pick some others, aesthetic, it's kind of a fun piece to blow on. We're going to open up with that. It's the changes to Love for Sale. So it's kind of up-tempo swinger. One piece I always wanted to do that I never did was I did get the music from Alice, a part of New York, New York. It's Autumn in New York, sort of a medley of Autumn, New York, and How About You. So we're going to do that. I've never done that. So that was maybe just like on my bucket list before I pack it in. I want to play that arrangement. So that's an amazing thing, by the way. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but I didn't realize until we started working on Bill. It starts with this Bill Evans. He's on that record, this Bill Evans solo, and I thought the whole thing was improvised. But George wrote, and I think this is true of a lot of his music. The first, I would say, minute at least, it's completely written out. So Bill Evans was playing almost like a modern classical piano piece, and then you'll hear, if you know it, Bill starts playing Autumn in New York, and and George arranges it, and it goes through sort of medley of Autumn in New York. It's all, well, the theme is New York, obviously. How About You? If you don't know that song, that's all about New York too. And then there are spots in that arrangement where it just sounds like George Russell. To me, I've been actually trying to figure out, like, okay, is he messing with the themes of these songs, or is it just George? And I'm still not sure. So that's another one. And then what am I missing? Stratus Funk. I think that's the only other one. And that's the Gil Evans arrangement of George's piece, which I just love, because I love Gil Evans partly, but I think that's I don't know if you know that piece, but that's another one that George would love to tell stories. If I'll tell you the story of that one if you don't know it. He said he was walking down New York one day, like one of the major streets, and he saw Miles. He was a close friend with Miles. He saw Miles at a distance, and according to his story, Miles came, they were walking towards each other, and Miles just started singing that. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, boom, boom, beep, ba-da. and they literally like walked past each other, like no conversation. So part of the composition, if you know it, every arrangement, including the one Joe Hunt played on, it starts with this bass line, which is like a development of the basic motive. And it's a blues, but starts soft. It sort of crescendos, there's solos, and then at the very end, there's a decrescendo. But I think that's just such a great story and an amazing piece, you know. So that's I guess the final one. Yeah. So there it is. But it was hard. There's so many pieces, you know, we could have done. Cubano B is one we did fairly recently. Maybe that's another thing. There are certain pieces I just try to stick in here and there. I think it was less than 2 years ago we did Roberta Igor's Yard with Don Byron. So I thought, well, just in case some of the same students are in the band, I want to continually introduce them to new pieces. So did that answer your question, Bill?
That does, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll listen to some of those selections. How about we go to one of the least known, is the Paleolithic game, which you'll be playing tomorrow. And I know that's in your top 10 list in the London Jazz Times recently.
Yeah.
Great piece.
And this is the great George Garzone on tenor sax. I mean, I have to say, I love this for so many reasons, but, you know, and George loves George Garzone loves George Russell, you know. I think it's great to have students try to do this, but George, I have to say, he just plays such a great solo on this one.
Live from Boston, Newbury Street, the Paleolithic game. Incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I most admired about George is just the scope of his interest. I guess like Miles, he was very interested in contemporary music. Um, and I think it got him into trouble. I mean, you talked to or somebody asked about why he wasn't more, well known. I think one story that I certainly heard a lot about was that at one point he was invited by the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra to perform, or they were going to play his music. And at that point, I think things had changed, but at that point, they told George, well, we're not going to play your music if it includes electric bass. And this was the period where he was writing things like African Game. And George said, well, then we won't play my music, because for him, electric bass was at that point just a part of the sound that he heard. So anyway, that's part of George's, I think, charm in a way, but maybe didn't always serve him in terms of getting his music across. That is just my sense anyway.
How about we listen to, since we're talking about Trip to Prilaguri, which features Stanton Davis spent a lot of time in, he's not in Boston anymore, is he? I know he's still around.
Yeah, last I knew, he was living in the New York area. He's from New Orleans originally, but amazing trumpet player and was very close to George. Yeah.
So this is let's just play Stratus Funk. Jan Garbarek and then Terj Ripdahl. And it's interesting because I know that around the time he did these recordings, he did the Listen to Silence and the Electronic Sonata, all before Bitches Brew came out. And how many think of him? What a pioneer. So
Yeah, this was while he was living in Scandinavia. I mean, that's a interesting chapter in his life.
Yeah. And then I guess probably performed live more in that 5-year period than any other half decade of his career.
It might be true.
Yeah. Well, just both government and private businesses support the music.
Mm-hmm.
So come to Jordan Hall tomorrow night and you can hear Stratus Funk.
Well, excuse me, I was talking. We did not intend to go into Esoteric Circle. That was Stratus Funk, George Russell Sextet from 1970. What a bass player Harold Anderson is. Ken, did you work with Stanton and George together over the years?
No,
No.
I've worked with them independently, but
Okay.
not together. Yeah, it's interesting. Stanton also worked with Carla Bley. He played on a lot of her large ensemble music. I was thinking, listening to that, I mean, one of the things that George did that very few people did was write for a small group, but have backgrounds for solos and interludes where he would compose these very elaborate things between the solos. He sort of approached writing for small groups the same way he did for big bands, where it wasn't just a bunch of solos one after the other. There was always some kind of, architecture that he had in mind. But
Brad, you had a question. You raised your hand during the music. Feel free to ask. I just posted in the chat my guest in 2 weeks, Lou Jones, a terrific photographer who grew up in the South End with a lot of great musicians, and he'll be joining me. And I posted some of his photos of American jazz artists. Okay, Brad does not have a question. Anyone have questions, comments?
one thing, Bill, I probably will have to sign off soon, so I apologize maybe in advance, but I think I told you I kind of raced home from work to join you. I haven't had dinner yet. I need to
Okay.
have a little time to relax before big day tomorrow. But I do appreciate your inviting me, and I hope you can all make it. Those of you who are in Boston, it's going to be a good concert. I mean, I hope we can do it justice. It's these
Sure
are
you
students that they've worked very hard, but it's maybe I'll tell you one story about George. This is sort of apropos of what I just said. I think it was my first year, so 2001. Part of my job was to put together the big band that George was going to lead, big band of students. And, I was doing my best working, and I got a call from George, might have been after the first rehearsal of the big band. And again, I kind of apologize in advance for my terrible imitation of George, but I'll try. He said, Ken, I don't know what you think of my music, but these kids that you have chosen to play my music are just not able to do it. And, he was serious, like we were talking about earlier. Like I thought, oh my God, this is it. I'm going to lose my job. George is upset at me. And, I said, oh, well, I'll look into it, George. Maybe I can find some other players. And then I forget, I talked to Alan Chase or someone else who was at NEC at the time, so George is upset. And he said, oh, this happens every year. That George, when he heard the band play, let's just say All About Rosie, the first rehearsal, of course, they're not able to play it at all. This is not, Eric Dolphy or Art Farmer, these session musicians who can just read anything. They need to work on this over time. So he was basically remembering the band from last year. I'm talking about George, and like, what happened? we had this down, and now we have to start all over. But anyway, it's he would always, I have to say, give him credit. He would work with the students, and usually by the time they performed, they were in good shape. Hopefully we'll be doing as well tomorrow night. So that's maybe my final story about George, but he was a sweet guy. I have to say, I mentioned this earlier. He was kind of scary to me at first, but I got to know him better when I came back, and I was really grateful for that, because he would tell me stories, like I said, about, these legends. That was kind of amazing to me, to hear stories about Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and the human side of them, which he knew, more than maybe just about anyone else I ever met. So
Kind of the broadness of his repertoire. I can't think of anyone.
yeah, and always being creative. I guess, to go back to what Joe Hunt said about him not wanting Joe to play Philly Joe's lick, I think that he took that personally. He didn't want to do the same things over and over. As great as that Jazz Workshop record was, the one with Concerto for Billy the Kid, he didn't want to keep doing that music. He would make the students play it, but in his own creative work, he was always looking ahead and trying new things. And I respect that a lot. And he was very encouraging to me personally. I should also say that, the fact that he would perform, music by Carla Bley and David Baker. I mean, a lot of band leaders wouldn't do that. It's like, oh, this is my group. It's all about me. It's all about my music. George was not like that. He was very supportive of other artists and individual students. He loved it when they were creative. To go back to what Joe said about him, encouraging everyone to have some kind of creative input. I saw that on a regular basis. If some student played a really great solo or really pushed themselves to do something that maybe they hadn't done before, George was the first one to say, yeah, man, good solo.
Yeah, I've heard George talk about Don Byron and vice versa.
Mhm.
They really quite a deep connection, and Don is another beats to his own drum.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Ken,
Yeah. Well,
for doing
thank
what
you.
you're doing, and
Thank
also
you, Bill.
spending an evening with us.
It's a pleasure. And thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. See you tomorrow.
See you then.
Well, if anybody has anything they want to hear, I can do it. Put it on if I have it at my fingertips.
Why don't you put on something from that Manhattan album?
Okay. Let me get to that. Give me 1 second. Why don't
That first track is pretty amazing.
you want the first
and-
track and not the Autumn in New York?
Well, that's great, but the first one with John Hendricks, I mean, that's so amazing. Is Max Roach and John Hendricks just like,
Right. In this
It's to the wicked.
Coltrane too.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. That's handy. That's right here. Okay.
I think it's just called Manhattan.
Manhattan. Yep. This was one of those, as I think I mentioned it. Shouldn't repeat. My jaw dropped when I heard this. How did they do this? And so anyway, let's go to some music. Manhattan.
Think you can look it? Get to the wicket. Buy you a ticket. Go! Go by bus, by plane, by car, by train. New York, New York. What they call a something else town. A city of more than 8 million people with 1 million people passing through every day. Some come just to visit and some come to stay. If you scuffle hard enough and you ain't no dunce, you can always get by in New York City. I heard somebody say once, yeah, if you can't make it in New York City, man, you can't make it nowhere. So where do people come to scuffle? Right here. Think you can look it? Get to the wicket. Buy you a ticket. Go! New York, New York, a city so nice they had to name it twice. It may seem like a cold town, but man, let me tell you, it's a soul town. And it ain't a bit hard to find someone who's lonesome or forlorn here. But it's like finding a needle in a haystack to find somebody who was born here. New York, New York. A something else town, all right. East side, west side, uptown, downtown. There's one thing all New York City has, and that's jazz. A while ago, there were cats reading while cats played jazz behind them. There wasn't nothing happening, so the musicians cooked right on like they didn't even mind them. I wrote the shortest jazz poem ever heard. Nothing about hugging, kissing. One word. Listen.
Yes, sir. Manhattan. What an incredible performance from 1958. John Hendrick reciting just one of the, just as we've said, and as Justin says, it doesn't get better than this. Nope, it does not. He started this recording before the recording of Kind of Blue, and it's interesting since Miles and George's paths were parallel, but could not be more divergent. And, you know, in the last 10 years of his recording career, George did a number of versions of So What. But he was a master at deconstructing, reconstructing, and making everything new. And we're going to do a short piece now, unless other people have something they want to say, or Arthur, do you know the song See Me Low? I don't hear you. You're muted.
See Me, no. What album is that from?
Okay, this is an Artie Shaw piece. It was a big hit in the late 40s by Peggy Lee.
See Me Low. No.
See Me, okay, good. Let's go to this. This is an arrangement he did for Artie Shaw in 1949.
Wow.
That was the Teddy Charles Tintet from 1956. Art Farmer trumpet, Don Butterfield tuba, G.G. Grice on alto sax, J.R. Montrose on the tenor sax, Saul Schlinger on baritone sax, Jimmy Rainey guitar, Mal Waldron piano, Teddy Kotek on bass, and Joe Harris on the drums. Original composition by George Russell called Lydian M1. Preceding that, from 1973, Gil Evans' classic Svengali, playing George's Blues in Orbit.
That Teddy Charles album is a classic. It has a great Gil Evans arrangement on it as well.
Incredible band there.
That's on Atlantic, isn't it?
You're correct. Yeah. You're right. Anything else anyone wants to hear? I've got All About Rosie by Jerry Mulligan at my fingertips. Another brilliant Al McCusick, You're My Thrill. Let's do You're My Thrill, unless anyone has something else. Okay. And we don't talk about how McCusick enough. Of course, this is arranged by our man tonight, George Russell. That was from 1983. 1983. He's called War Gewesen, written by David Baker. Personnel is in the chat, except I didn't have time to put the drummer, Keith Copeland. And preceding that, we heard Hal McCusick again. You're My Thrill, arranged by George Russell. We got time for a few more pieces. Anybody want something in particular from this record that we just heard? The record is entitled "So What," and yeah, nobody did "So What" quite like this. Well, again, thanks everybody for joining me tonight, and thanks to Ken and Joe and everyone else in the audience. I'll be back in 2 weeks, which will be November the 1st, and I posted in the chat. Great photographer Lou Jones is going to be with me. Lou grew up in the South End, and lots of great musicians live near him and visiting. So a lot of the photos that he's taken are in people's kitchen or his kitchen, or so. It'll be a very good show. Looking forward to doing that with you. Again, thanks to Joe and Ken. And maybe I'll see you tomorrow, Justin, at Jordan Hall. So the same group that we just heard playing the David Baker song will be playing So What. Good night, and thank you all. And also, thank you, Cliff Bodenweiser. Can't forget you.